Greetings, everybody out there, Moms Rising world. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have just a delicious and informative series about the Momnibus. As folks know, we have been working hard to raise awareness around this issue. And today, what we're going to do is talk to some of the experts that are working to not only expose a lot of the medical apartheid that is leading to these disparities that are existing in Black maternal health, and really just the overall deficiency that we have in the maternal health system overall, but also folks that are bringing solutions. That are bringing interventions and are bringing strategies that are going to save the lives of mamas. And so today we are joined by Dr. Karen A. Scott, and she is the Chief Black Feminist Physician Scientist and founding CEO and owner of Birthing Cultural Rigor, LLC. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for being here with us. As we discuss the most pressing topics affecting women, particularly Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color, our conversation comes on the heels of so many advocacy moments at the intersection of race, gender, and socioeconomic status, all of which impacts Black women's access to abortion pills, equitable reproductive health care, all the things that we need. I mean, we didn't even go into the stuff around family economic security, like paid leave and childcare, right? There is definitely holes within what should be a safety net. And Moms Rising has been working in partnership with so many sister organizations who are invested in amplifying the voices of Black mamas and birthing room justice advocates by using storytelling and to support bodily autonomy while calling on our government, federal, state, and local, to pass things like the Black Maternal Health Momnibus, which can help reduce some of these things in addition to other things, because that is not a silver bullet, right? So we know that the numbers don't lie. Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related deaths than white women. Indigenous women are twice as likely to die. And the US, period, has the worst maternal health outcomes amongst leading nations. And most of these deaths are preventable. We saw that in a recent CDC report. So we want to know from you, from your amazing work, one, what brings you to this work? And tell us about birthing cultural rigor.
Yes, thank you, Monifa. Thank you all for being with us. So, I will say that what brings me to this work um, is being at the intersection of both the oppressor and the oppressed. And I'll give context to that by saying I am a Southerner, born and raised as a Black woman, whose mother and family navigated, like the feminization of poverty, intimate partner violence.
Hmm.
I went to school and got breakfast and lunch for free. In my neighborhood, I saw lots of things, in order to get into our neighborhood, which I would say was right one step above the projects in East Nashville, in CWA. We used to have to wait in line to get into our parking lot. There was one way in, one way out. And at the intersection of the corners were the drug dealers. And so literally seeing them tap on our windows, my mom's, car door, the driver's door, and for us to be like, we're just trying to go home, essentially. But I never thought we were poor, right? So I grew up with a lot of chosen and given family and just curious about how women make decisions about their bodies, about parenting, about partnering, about the men and partners in their lives, the jobs they take, the churches we go to. That's just always been my curiosity. And then just looking at how the women in my family have survived so much. So I take that curiosity and combine it with science. I love DNA, RNA, all that stuff. I thought I was going to be a molecular biologist and got to college and was introduced really to Billy Avery and the Black Women's Health Project by my white feminist plant physiologist and just like hero, Ren Edwards, a white woman. And in her class of biology, female sexuality, I just really got introduced to kind of like the movement and the scholarly work of fighting for women's rights and reproductive rights. and there was Billy Avery. So I switched my career to become an OBGYN, thinking, now, mind you, I do not like physicians. I'm just saying it as one. By training, I'm a board certified recovering OBGYN. I'm an applied epidemiologist. I'm a public health scholar. I also identify as a Care Bear hugger, a Yoda, follower. I'm a Trekkie. Like I have all these things going on. So I'm always curious and expanding, right? Having this viewpoint that includes all types of peoples, their voices, their positionality, their talent. Um, and I really want to transform healthcare delivery models for Black women and
Mhm.
girls. That's not what OBGYNs do. But I assumed that with my background coming up poor, a broken home, all those things, right? All the things that the Reaganomics, the Reagan era would have said, I would be the byproduct of a single Black female head of household. Like those things were, in theory, working against me. I pursued an MD for people to listen to me straight up. I thought I could be seen as an authority figure on women's health to make decisions about women's health. And what I found, and never wanting to be a physician, and then learning about how to be an OBGYN, that by the time my intern year, I was like, what the hell have I got myself into? Like, this is not what I wanted to do. Um, it has nothing to do with academic performance. It literally was, we're putting a band-aid everything that comes through the emergency room, through the clinic. I was on South Side Chicago. Like, as an OBGYN, I am not addressing the fundamental need. I'm only a temporary band-aid. Especially when you begin to see people come in again, and there's a pregnancy in the tube and medicine doesn't work, and so surgically we go in and take this one tube, and then to see that person come back from when I was a resident to when I'm an attending, right, supervising another resident, and to take out her second tube, and therefore now
Mm.
physically incapable of creating like a spontaneous pregnancy. I'm like, this is not it. Um, I got birthed into reproductive justice in 2010, and that shook my world, but it was also my salvation, and it made me have a better appreciation that like that is what I was looking for, and not being a physician.
Yes.
And
Well,
so,
I want to thank you for both, though. I just wanted to insert
well,
that,
I thank
because
you.
it is a both and.
It is a both and, right? And so I think that's when I came into realizing the history of
Yeah.
OBGYNs and in this country. And I had became the very monster that I was actually trying to, find in those spaces. And really birthing culture rigor is, it's like, it's a gift. It's like it's offering back to communities as a form of resistance, right, against these systems and structures that really by design never had anything to do with our autonomy, our vitality, our thriving, our being able to be autonomous, independent, sovereign agents in our bodies to choose if, when, where, and how we pursue pleasure and partnership and partnering and parenting, and doing that without fear or the actual retaliation of, right, government or law enforcement based on our
Mhm.
decisions. And birthing culture rigor is, for me, I hope that it is a way that we we state the obvious, right, for us is that despite safety initiatives, technology, social protections such as higher income, higher education, being married, living in a certain zip code, um, having a certain profession, all the alphabets behind your name. Despite all those things, hospitals are not held accountable
That's right.
for how they treat us or kill us and or harm us in our communities. And so it is an act of resistance to address this manufactured epidemic of unpreventable, preventable harm and deaths that does impact all of us, but particularly Black and Indigenous people. And in the last particularly 3 years, that rise has been
It's gone
exponentially
up.
higher for Black women and birthing people, particularly in the pandemic, which was like, it was the looking glass.
Yes.
This is our raw systems, right, and structures. And so Our mission is to improve the quality, safety, value of healthcare experiences, which is the improvement science, and to facilitate community and health systems uptake of evidence of empathy, equity driven interventions, and to practice and policy across the sexual, reproductive, and perinatal life course of Black women, mothers, and Black women, girls, and gender expansive people. That's the implementation science piece. So we are the first and only Black feminist, community owned and led quality improvement and implementation science practice research firm that is really disrupting the
Mm-hmm.
ethics, the science, the leadership, the knowledge, the measurement, selections, and monitoring strategies, the quality, accessibility, data quality and accessibility, and data sovereignty, as well as community participation partnership. That's what we do across health
Mm-hmm.
services provision, evaluation, and training, and
I
all
want
of the
to I want to
information.
ask you something though,
Yeah,
specifically about that data
yeah,
piece. So
yeah.
one of the things that was really exciting that I
Hmm.
saw that
Yeah.
you have done was
Hmm.
created the first and only validated patient reported experience measure of obstetric racism, and that's
Yes.
known as PREM OB scale suite.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we know that we cannot solve things that we can't see and measure. And
Yes.
as you were talking, it just reminded me how we come full circle with not only the interventions, but really evaluating the problem.
Yes.
When the CDC report came out about the jump during COVID, my
Hmm.
mom started telling me stories about she's from South Texas, and
Mm-hmm.
she's in her 70s, all her siblings, her cousins, her neighbors. She says, "Well, we were all delivered by Mary Clark, right? Mary
Mm-hmm.
Clark was the Black midwife, and
Mm-hmm.
she knew what was happening, and she knew that we didn't have access, and that
Yes.
we were really the ones that were going to protect and save us. And so she had a methodology, whether your baby was
Mm-hmm.
breech, whether you had problems not dilated. She said Mary Clark, had kind of researched this. And this is a Black Southern midwife, right?
Mm-hmm.
And developed a way to birth, two generations of folks. She said her whole generation and a generation before, she says everybody in that town was delivered
Mm-hmm.
by Mary Clark. So as you were talking, it made me think about Mary
Yeah.
Clark. And as I read
Mm-hmm.
your work, I'm thinking about how we develop these amazing innovations when we don't have a bulk of the resources. But tell us about PREM OB scale.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That at least makes me proud to be who I am and how I've been able to contribute to our community, even though I was an OBGYN trained in this country. And I believe because I am a Southern Black woman grounded in reproductive justice and Black feminism and research justice, that and add on, right, epidemiology and public health, and I'm a social scientist and anthropologist at heart, that I look at the problem differently. And so the patient reported experience measure of obstetric racism, known as the PREM OB scale, is the first and only valid quality instrument that, number one, defines the problem through the expertise and theories, experiences of Black women, right? And so before I could develop the measurement, I needed a theory defined by a Black woman who conceptualized the issue through systems and structures of oppression, and how at the intersections of racism and sexism, classism, right, that those system structures are harming our bodies, and at the cellular level, even before pregnancy occurs, where there are physiological changes, that if that pregnancy occurs within this body that across generations has been controlled or dominated, experienced injustice across many systems, that pregnancy may not go in an optimal, healthy way, not because the person is older, sicker, or bigger, fatter, but literally that body has already been worn down by systems or structures.
Yes.
And that body, when it was within another body, because if you really think about it, a pregnant person, especially if it is a female, and the eggs, that fetus that's within that pregnant body also already has all the eggs it's going to have at 16 weeks of pregnancy. That's 3 generations. And
Yeah,
so
that's
we had to,
amazing.
right? So we had to use a theory Leith Mullins, the late Leith Mullins, a Black feminist anthropologist with the Sojourner syndrome, that looked at how not only there were these premature deaths among Black men, but also Black women, even when they are most affluent, that these systems and structures were impacting the way our bodies functioned. And the problem wasn't the individual, right? The systems and structures. So he took a way of conceptualizing that this manufactured crisis of death and dying that's unfairly, uniquely, disproportionately impacted Black mothers and Black people is really a social, it's a system structural issue. So let's define the problem as a system structural issue. And then let's then have the people who are experiencing the greatest burden utilize that tool that says the system's a problem, but it's through their witnesses, right? Through their testimonies, not having the system or the structure say, well, this is what harm looks like. Well, we have that now. Right now in this country, quality and safety is defined as being safe by those who are in power. And so, for example, when the outcome is a vaginal birth or a cesarean birth, and that outcome is used to evaluate the performance of a hospital or a system, right? And that evaluation quality is then connected to a score that determines reimbursement, right? If you're following me, it's really our body's performance of resisting generations of reproductive injustice, control, and dominance across generations. That's what the outcome is. That's not the hospital's performance of how well they treat or mistreat us. So when we move away from using an outcome to evaluate quality, but the testimonies of Black mothers and birthing people who feel that they are not being listened to, they're not being heard, that they're being neglected, dismissed, disregarded, that there are lapses in diagnosis, that there's intentionally pain being caused, that there's medical coercion or abuse. We have hospital stop and frisk of Black men or Black male presenting people who are there to support the Black birthing person. Like all of these phenomenon, which Dr. Donna Ian Davis describes as obstetrical racism, which is really at the intersection of medical racism and obstetric violence, when the harm is defined by those experiencing the harm, and then we translate that harm into a score so that regardless of the outcome, the quality is determined by
Okay.
how you treated me,
Yes.
the care experience. The experience is the indicator of quality and safety. Then now we can talk about things like, to me, respectful care is respectability politics, right? If I give birth or if I get pregnant and stay pregnant and birth and parent at a respectable age, a respectable body weight, a respectable income, education.
Interesting.
The late Kira Johnson, right? What happened
Hmm.
to that's body weight, that's affluence, that's marriage. Let's look at Serena Williams and Beyonce, Dr. Shalom Irving, education, income, marriage, the best bodies, and they
Right.
still, right? And so
And
it's
access to
difficult for
information, income, all the
right.
things that they say, oh no, it's
We're
really this.
supposed to do our
And we want to underscore that when I was saying
yes,
the disparities, those disparities hold independent of income,
yes,
education,
yes,
parity, all the
yes.
things that they tell us are the real reasons. And then the common denominator is, of course, that we are Black women.
Right. So take what you just stated and create a measure that demonstrates that. So the Prim
Yeah.
Open scale was based on the experiences of being pregnant, laboring, giving birth, and being postpartum of 37 Black mothers and birthing people in Oakland and LA. Their experience helped to create the domains of quality and safety, where SACRED is an acronym for S, safety and accountability. A is for autonomy, C is for communication and information exchange. The R is for racism, for really anti-Black racism, and then misogynoir. E is for empathy and dignity. The D is for dignity and holistic care. And we added K in there because initially the autonomy was linked to kinship, right? We know in our communities, given
Mhm.
and chosen families matter. And so we realized through the experiences of Black mothers and birthing people that kinship, whether it be through play auntie who's the nurse that their mama's friend that happens to be in the room because they work at the hospital, or even through their child or through their partner, that biological and social kin became core strategies to protect and mitigate against the other harms in the S,
That's
the
right.
A, the C, the R, the E, and the
Hmm.
D. So it's really sacred with the K, the CK. And these
Hmm.
are patient and community defined domains that actually map onto the Institutes of Health's safety domains, but we name these. And within each domain are specific or explicit language and behavior performed by hospital clinicians and staff that are consistent with acts of obstetric racism. So we had 37 Black mothers and birthing people in creating the domains. We had 806 Black mothers and birthing people across 34 hospitals, 348 hospitals, and 34 states plus DC take the validated scale, take the scale in 2020. And validation does not mean we're validating their experiences. Validation is a scientific method to ensure that the questions that we asked we're really evaluating the problem, which, as you said, Monifa, that independent of individual
That's right.
characteristics,
Hmm.
harm still happens to us. So we had to create a scale, and through the science, that's what we showed that independent of the individual's age, their body mass index, um, the birth type or modality, whether it was a vaginal or cesarean birth, that obstetric racism still happens. And
Yes.
so now we have this measure of kinship, humanity, and racism, anti-black racism, and misogynoir that happens to us during the provision of care when you are hospitalized for labor, birth, and postpartum. And we now can answer all those what if questions. For example, what is the association between obstetric racism and having midwives in the hospital? We can answer that question now. And do you want to
Yes.
know what it shows us? Is that when we did, an
It shows
evaluation of
us what we know about Mary Clark, right?
right? That if you birth with a midwife, you have lower scores of
Hmm.
disrupted kinship, of dehumanizing care, of black focused, anti-black, racist, or misogynoir in the care. If you birth with a physician, usually an OBGYN, because that's between OBGYNs and physicians, there are OBGYNs and there's family practice physicians, but mostly OBGYNs are the physicians at birth, that the rates of obstetric racism were much higher in all three categories. But we also showed that when you had integrated care, right, when a midwife in collaboration with the physician was at your birth, you were in the
Interesting.
middle, right? We also have shown in a paper in Annals of Family Medicine because we ask these questions that if there is a community support person with you throughout your labor, birth, and postpartum when you are hospitalized, and that community support person is someone without hospital affiliation or alignment, so your partner, your spouse, your mother, your doula, your community
Doulas, yeah.
midwife, right? Your community midwife, or your sister, anybody that is not on the side of the hospital, if they are present with you during a childbirth hospitalization, your scores of obstetric racism are significantly reduced across all three categories.
That's
That has not been
amazing.
done before. And that's
Right.
all because we focused on, right, defining the problem, naming the problem, measuring the problem through the expertise, the intellectual thoughts and political activism of patient, community, and content experts who are all Black women.
Yes.
That
I
and
just
that
I
has
just
not
want to
been done
say
before.
I just want to say, because you started off like, I made this mistake being a physician. But
Yeah,
honestly, having you speak these truths
yeah,
and being the doctor is powerful, right? Because it's one thing for patients and community folks and advocates to say that we're the experts, but to have someone who has gone through the process, who is a doctor, who is an OB, reiterate that the patient and their community are the experts is
hmm
very powerful. It
hmm
helps us in all of our advocacy.
hmm
And in the few minutes we have left, I just really want to hear from you two things.
yes,
One, you named the piece about the C-section. So
yes,
going back to the story my mother told me, right, that Mary Clark didn't do any C-sections, right? Like that so she had
hmm
two generations across the whole county in South Texas where births were successful. And then
hmm
you see, as I'm born, right? It was great migration. My mom, her
hmm
first cousins, people split out all over. there's an explosion in C-section rate. I was born through C-section. My brother was born through C-section, and then when I had kids, they were both C-sections. And then like my first cousins, like that whole like next group,
Mm-hmm.
like my mom and then her group under that, there's like all of a sudden it's like, half the births are C-sections, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about how that the shifting from the community midwife into the hospitals and how you talked about the billable, but I just want to get into that a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Yeah.
And before
Yeah.
we end,
Yeah.
to talk about the current attacks on our
Yeah.
bodily autonomy and our
Yeah.
reproductive rights and how
Yeah.
that connects to all of these pieces.
Right. They're also connected. I mean, so I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off, but let's just go for it. When so I remember when Representative Underwood and I'm blanking on the other person's name introduced the Black maternal.
Alma
And
Adams.
yes, Representative Underwood and Adams introduced the Black maternal, I think, Health Caucus in 2019, and I was doing like a testimony at that time period, and I made the statement that physicians are trained to manage time, right, and bodies throughout birth, where doulas move through time with bodies, right, in birth. There's a difference when you need to manage the situation versus when you make space and yield to what's happening and let it happen naturally. These are generalizations, but what I feel and what the evidence is showing is that number one, like there's a movement towards people must be induced if they have not spontaneously gone to labor by 39 weeks. I'm not going to name that trial, but there's that movement that essentially all pregnancies need to end at 39 weeks. I mean, end by like through an induction or spontaneous labor. So with this push towards induction of labor at 39 weeks, and that particular push again on our community, on Black folks, where because of obstetric racism embedded throughout our entire system, that by virtue of the system responding to our blackness, our black and womanness, our blackness in pregnancy, that as soon as you check black, we end up being on this list of all these high risk things. And so then it becomes, well, because you're black, fill in the blank. Because you're black and old, you're black and fat, you're black and sicker, you're black and this, you need to have these surveillance testing, right? And then we don't trust your womb and your placenta to provide what it needs to the fetus at this particular time. So let's go ahead and move towards an induction to end this. And there are times when yes, there is a medical reason or indication for forcing right labor on someone with medicines or nipple stimulator, like
Of
all those
course, of
things.
course.
But so let's say, but when a particular group, right, is disproportionately impacted by forced inductions, right, and then let's say that induction, since it was forced, the cervix, right, the opening to the womb wasn't yet ripe or ready. And then we keep on pushing medicines, whether it's through the IV or through your vagina, through your mouth to get labor going. And let's say the induction fails. All these, look at the terminology: failed induction, well, so forced induction, failed induction, the cervix didn't open up, so it's failure to progress, right, throughout labor. And then what's next? A cesarean birth. And so then it becomes a recommendation that at this point, your cervix did not open up despite X number of hours. We're concerned with this and that. So when that really exhausted womb, right, that's been overexposed to lots of medicines, and this failed induction, failure to progress, now is cut because that's the way to facilitate birth through surgery, that uterus
Interesting.
is not going to
Hmm.
respond as optimally to shrinking and contracting down, right? Which is what's supposed to happen when the baby is no longer in the uterus. This overexposure to all these medicines, the failed induction, the failed progress to labor, then that same group that people are saying, well, you shouldn't get pregnant, you shouldn't give birth, but then you're forcing inductions on us.
Yeah.
Then failed labor, now cesarean, now a uterus that doesn't respond, now there's a hemorrhage, now the medicines that normally will be given either through the IV or directly to the uterus in the OR operating room, or the different maneuvers, mechanical things that we do are no longer working. Things are escalating in a domino effect that leads to a
Mm-hmm.
hysterectomy, possibly a blood transfusion, ICU, all of these near death situations.
Yeah.
come that right. But the thing is, now people are like, well, what if you
Morbidity.
come to the hospital
Mhm.
and you just have a C-section? Because that's 20 minutes versus a week plus of time the physicians have to be caring for you. And I'm not saying it's a money maker. I'm just saying if a cesarean birth is reimbursed at a higher rate than a vaginal birth, and a cesarean birth can last 20 minutes, really, if I mean, with no complications from incision to closure, then think about the movement towards cesarean births. I'm just saying, consider the
Mhm.
motivations behind that. And then going back to the words forced, when after Dobbs and now the mifepristone, when the right to make the decision to end a pregnancy through abortion, um, and one is forced to continue to sometimes get pregnant and to stay pregnant, and now to be forced into an induction or forced into having a birth attendant or forced into birth spaces and settings, right? The lack of equitable access to midwives, community midwives, licensed midwives, nurse midwives, and to be able to have autonomy if in choosing, right, with informed consent, whether the home birth, the community birth in a birth center, or a hospital birth is for you. When you remove all of that and it's all forced in the hospital, then you have to think about obstetric racism really is a manifestation of of obstetrics in the afterlife of slavery. You're forcing people to birth and parent in conditions that they did not choose. That's what really Dobbs has done, is that it's made obstetric racism really be at the forefront. And that's what we've been fighting the entire time. So our work actually means even more now because we do have forced pregnancies, forced births, and forced settings with forced attendance that the data has shown is not always safe for us to birth. And I am an OBGYN, but it's not always the safest option for us to be birthing in a hospital setting with
Yeah.
only having an OBGYN at the bedside. If the data is showing that birthing in a hospital and with the physician, right, is associated with all these harms and also possibly death. And so we are being forced to birth in ways that are not the safest and are
It's
not
not. Yeah.
um, and really aren't really the most scientific and culturally rigorous and responsive and relevant. Like you said, like we birth in community, we birth with midwives birth us. I mean, our
Yeah.
nation is here
For
because
many generations.
of midwives, and
Yeah.
that's being taken away not only because of Dobbs, but because of right the hierarchy of healthcare, the fact that in certain states, certain midwives or advanced practice nurses can't work independently, and so one way folks who are physicians, which is what I do, is like, how do you utilize or leverage your MD to support advanced practice nurses and
Mm.
midwives, right? That's what I do with Village of Healing and You Go to Ohio. Shout out to Dana Langford. Like, there are ways that we can still navigate at the intersection of being the oppressor and the oppressed so that
Yeah.
we can advance justice and accountability.
Yeah. I think of it as an inside outside games. I think of
Yes.
like an organizer piece. I hear you with the oppressor and oppressed piece. And I'm definitely sitting with that. And I hear it, it resonates. Several times you said, and we're wrapping to the end,
Mhm.
but you said forced a lot, right?
Mhm.
Forced birth, forced induction, forced labor. And it just kept making me think of like control, right?
Yes.
The controlling of our bodies
Yes.
since we got here,
Yes.
right? Since
Yes.
our very first mamas got here, right?
Yes.
And how all of the systems that have been created, the layers and layers and layers, like from chattel
Mhm.
slavery to
Yes.
the medicalization of childbirth, like all of the systems around that
Mhm.
are containing and controlling. It's like
Mhm.
control, 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 control.
Mhm. Yes.
And then you said
Mm.
the value, right, of like the birth workers
Yeah.
or of birthing culture rigor is
Mhm.
to yield to what's happening, right? So there's
Mhm.
some folks that are trying to manage the birth,
Yes.
they're trying to manage the time, where our mamas and our birthing experts knew that the birth is managing you, right? You have to yield to what's happening. And leaning back into that just shows me how Black women, and we're always coming back full circle to like what
Yeah.
we know and what
Yes.
we've known.
Yes.
Um,
Mhm.
it's connecting me to what you said about us having existed in our grandmothers, our great grandmothers' wombs,
Our
maybe.
grandmother's wounds, yes. Our great,
Yeah,
it was like great grandmother, grandmother, and then like the
right. Because
Mhm.
while we were in while our mothers were in their mother's womb, we
We were,
existed
yes, and them
in their
as little
bodies.
big, yes.
So,
Mhm.
physically and advocacy wise, this is all so connected. And
Yeah.
that's what makes me feel like we are going to win, right? That we are going to get and we're
Yes.
going to seize back our bodily autonomy
Yes.
because we keep coming back to what we know as we advance. In just some final words, what do you say are the next pieces of this? Like, how are we advancing? Um, Birthing cultural rigor, the Momnibus, which we talked about. We're going to break that down some more in these series about the Black
Right.
Maternal Health Caucus and
Right.
this Momnibus, which is a package of 12 bills. But what
Mhm.
would you say in the final words is really like
Mhm.
our next push forward, our next advance in the fight to
Right.
save Black mothers' lives?
Yes. Number one, we need to name obstetric racism as an adverse event. So write a letter, call your legislator, call your providers, call your hospitals, call your health insurance plans, and demand, as particularly as a Black mother and birthing person, or as the Black given and chosen kin, access to taking the prim OB scale and working and having your hospital or your health plan work with birthing culture rigor. So naming obstetric racism as an adverse event, mandating that obstetric racism be included on the HEDIS, Press Ganey, the Joint Commission, like all of these hospital performance indicators, right? So we are seeing a lot of things are being controlled and forced on us. So what would it look like, right, if safety, patient safety was inclusive of emotional, cultural, psychological safety, right? Our safety is more than just an absence of physical injury. It's really our cultural, emotional, spiritual, psychological safety. So that's the other piece, is that demanding that hospital quality be inclusive of emotional, cultural, um, psychological safety. And again, that can be done by utilizing the Primobi scale and supporting the restoration, again, as you said, full circle, of Black midwifery, of Black doulas, of Black lactation workers,
Yes.
making space for Black maternal mental health workers. Like we were best when we were in a village where we took care of ourselves. And I think that we need to hold systems accountable for their ongoing erasure and exclusion of us, right? As compensated leaders in making these decisions from design to dissemination. And that really, I'm hoping that opens up the space in quality and patient safety, because there are not many of us that look like me in this space.
Yes.
And that's where we need to be to get where we can go back to a place of where all of us were together in community birthing, and we survived and thrived together as a community.
That's right. That's right. And we are so grateful for having you. I hope you can
Thank
come back again.
you. I hope so too.
Um,
I hope so.
yes, as we advance, because we can talk about this in so many parts,
Right.
and I want to continue to do that. But thank you so much for coming, Dr. Karen Scott.
Thank you,
Um,
Mom's
I'm
Rising.
I'm inspired.
Thank
I'm
you, because you
inspired.
you know where how I started this our time together. So I just say thank you for seeing me, for lifting me up, and for adding value to why I had to go on this particular journey. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.